I feel more optimism, even though it feels like that we're headed towards and are maybe even really in some turbulent times. And my reason for optimism is that I'm seeing a large number of people waking up to things. I really feel like that whether it's through the path of psychedelics or whatever it is that people are endeavoring in, that there's some shifts in their perception and reality, and that we don't need everybody to be awake to what needs to come next or how to get through some of these hard times, but we need enough people to be aware.
Welcome, tribe. I'm Maya Rose.
And I'm Gerald Rogers. We're about to embark on another mind-expanding episode where we dive deep into the realms of psychedelics, sex, and the superconscious.
This is a transformational experience of healing, manifestation, increased clarity, flow, and alignment.
So join us on this sacred journey as we receive the codes of transformation from scientists and psychonauts, shamans, tantra masters, mystics, and more.
Together, we'll unravel the secrets of plant medicine, sex magic, and other tools to tap into higher states of consciousness.
So why are we here? To answer the call, to share our passions, and to be advocates for alternative healing.
So get ready for a ride that transcends the ordinary and leads you to the extraordinary, because living a legendary life is not just a choice.
It's a sacred adventure. Welcome to this episode of Psychedelics, Sex, and the Superconscious. And today we've got Dr. Amy Albright, and we are so excited to dive in this conversation where we can really explore the intersection of science, psychedelics, and spirituality, and really talking about how these things are merging and how science is catching up to this world of spirituality in some really meaningful ways. And it's an honor to have you on, Dr. Amy. This has been a long time coming. Our calendars have been working to sync up, but I always trust in divine timing. And so here we are, and I'm so excited about that. And I always love to start with a game I call the question game. So I'm just going to ask you a question about you and just going to invite you to tune in. So what's something that Dr. Amy Albright is proud of about herself right now? What are you proud of right now?
It's a great question. I think it's around the space of my inner strength and courage to stand up and talk about things that are not mainstream, and to not pretend to be mainstream anymore myself, not pretend to be normal, and really allow myself, I'll say, to come out of the spiritual closet even more. It's an edge I'm working, and I feel like it's been a lifelong journey. So I'm excited about that.
It's like this moment of victory where we stop trying to pretend to wear the costume of being normal, where we're like, all right, I'm going to take that disguise off, and I'm just going to own unapologetically my weirdness. And I think it's really amazing. Will you share with the audience a little bit about your background and how you came to be where you're at right now?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I started off very much I kind of, let's say, academically, very nerdy, very atheist, very much a skeptic, studying neurosciences and believing that we could understand the human experience if we could just understand our neurochemistry. So that was my first year of academic studies. And then when I was 18 and a half or so, I had a massive spiritual experience that changed my perspective on life and also my trajectory from there. And so it allowed for me to understand that there was a God. And this all just happened. There was no psychedelics involved. I was laying on an acupuncture table and, knowing nothing about Chinese medicine, could trace out meridians and could feel myself what felt like levitating and sinking. And I could hear a concert of voices whispering answers and comfort to me. So it was it's like, oh, wait a minute, there is a God, and science will never be able to explain all that this is. And that actually ties me to something that you said about science catching up. And I feel like that's a really important perspective. Maybe modern culture thinks that science is leading the way, but it's actually catching up. There's so much more information that we haven't been able to validate. But anyway, so my story went from there. I ended up studying in an academic format, entheogens, rites of passage, shamanism, but also that was kind of a lot of my undergrad stuff. was anthropology of Native American indigenous studies. And then I ended up studying a whole bunch of cognitive psychology because I really realized, like, wait a minute, the brain is impacting our behavior. And we're more than neurotransmitters, but what is that relationship? I graduated and realized I didn't want to be a researching professor, took a one-way ticket to Costa Rica long enough ago that there was no internet. There was no cell phones. It was a very different country back then. And I basically went and I ended up staying 2.5 months on a vision quest to figure out what I wanted to do. So this idea of like knowing that I have a massive calling started very early for me and being in the quest for it. And I feel like I am in the quest and it's being revealed daily. Anyways, fast forwarding, I ended up getting a degree in Chinese medicine, going back and getting my doctorate once that was available. But 22 years ago, I started in practice and I realized that I knew the answer to what the patients were. Like I could ask them anything and I could know what their answers were in advance. And I could understand in a very intricate way how their psyche, how their emotional and energetic bodies were relating to their physical body, none of which was I really taught in school. I mean, very, very rudimentary stuff in Chinese medicine school about that. And so there was just a bunch of miracles that started happening with individuals. I ended up specializing in business folks. I ended up doing strategic advising and executive coaching for there was a lot of emphasis on that for like 10 years. Somewhere in there, I ended up meeting my colleague, Dr. Drew Pearson, and we started to develop this body of medicine and neurosciences that basically can create replicable, measurable, and well understood pathways to creating consciousness and wisdom in the body, liberating not only from suffering, but also being able to enter into altered states of consciousness on demand. So we started cultivating that about 13 years ago. He's the neuroscientist and I'm the big sense organ. I'm the empath and the clairvoyant that can help and can speak enough neurosciences as a language and an understanding to be able to help to develop that medicine. So now we're offering incredible opportunities for people to experience themselves in retreat settings. Also, I have an online mystery school where I teach. It's a modern mystery school. So it's the basis of understanding that I have been taught by my work experience, basically, on how all of this is put together. So we have a variety of different offerings, and I also just help other people to facilitate retreats and give talks and spread the love as much as I can, spread the word that science and spirituality are actually all describing the same thing.
I love it. Like you literally are the bridge of science and spirituality. You know, anyone that can like dive deep in the world of neuroscience and also simultaneously be clairvoyant and like, you know, be connected to these other realms. I think that's really fascinating. What a special and unique role you have on the planet. I want to rewind a little bit and have you share just because this caught my attention. You spent, did you say 2.5 months in Costa Rica on a vision quest? Just like,
Not where I was starving myself vision quest, but I went down there with the prayer of show me what I am to do. I know that I'm here for a specific purpose and I know that I'm not to be a researching professor. I thought I wanted to study the brain forever, but then I realized that they were going to try to keep me in a lane. Like I'm supposed to only study memory and then only a specific theory within that. And that sounded like hell to me. So there was a bit of an existential crisis that I went through at the end of my academic career because I was prepared for that and then suddenly decided not to go that way. But I didn't know what to do next. So yeah, I bought a one-way ticket and I mean, it was wild. I was like hitchhiking. I was one of the only non-native women that I saw for like the first 2 months. So I had to learn, you know, and I was doing everything in Spanish and it was a wild time, you know, bus rides down dirt roads to staying in a house with no walls, out in the middle of a gold mining village. That was miles from the nearest dirt road, like that kind of travel. And it taught me a lot.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Costa Rica sure has flourished since then. That's interesting. What clues did you have like for someone else that's like seeking for that alignment of purpose, like really seeking for the clarity? What did you learn about the path to discovering and unlocking that purpose?
it's a bit of a breadcrumb trail, and you just have to listen each step of the way. And when I mean listen, I mean really quiet the mind, like really, really get out of the way and do things that seem outlandish or dangerous or too wild, or that reframe what you think reality is or who you think you are, you know. And I think along the way, because I think it's longer than even if you get like, there was a specific moment where I was told to go to acupuncture school, like to go to school to learn Chinese medicine. But even within that, as soon as I graduated, I went off on another trajectory and ended up doing a whole bunch of other things. So I feel like it's really a lifelong listening, and I feel like that's what we're in. I know that's what you're inviting people into too, in the space that you're working in with psychedelics and helping people to set up these beautiful healing spaces and retreat centers and helping them to get quiet.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I think when we're starting our journey, we always expect it to be like this linear path that like just goes straight from where we are to where we want to be and like focusing on these goals. But it's this windy, twisty, bumpy road of purpose, and being able to like just be present, like, okay, where's this road leading right now? And like you said, practicing our capacity to hear. And one of the things I feel that psychedelics does better than anything is that it enhances our ability to listen. For me, like a very beautiful psychedelic journey just helps me tune in my heart, tune in my mind to greater possibilities. And whether it's me tuning in my relationship with my beloved, my Rose, or whether it's me like tuning into, okay, what's the next thing that the source is wanting me to create now, or me tuning in and just like listening to like what my soul needs on this step of the journey. Like psychedelics really supports in helping me listen better. Will you share with us your beginning experiences with psychedelics and how that relationship with psychedelics has evolved over the years?
So the first time that I worked with psychedelics, I was 18 years old, and I probably ended up on close to a hero's dose, not having any idea what was going to happen. And it was not a pleasant experience. Second time was with LSD, not a pleasant experience. And that was like at 18, 19. And then I had probably about 4 years later, I started to work with psilocybin in a more intentional way. But I don't know that I really knew how to engage with it. I didn't understand kind of like the full depth of it. And then honestly, after a handful of experiences in my mid-20s, I didn't touch psychedelics maybe at all, at least for a decade, probably more close to 15 years. And so during that time, I was really, what I was training myself to do before I even met Dr. Drew Pearson, my neurosciences colleague, was to drop into altered states of consciousness without psychedelics. And that's what I was doing for my patients and then later with clients. But I, since then, like in the last, I don't know, some number of years, I feel like I dropped back in very deeply with the world of psychedelics, like with the medicines, because I feel like it's actually in a way like a native state. So like my brain, when completely sober and just in a normal eyes open state, is very altered compared to most people. Like a deep, consistent state of meditation, which typically meditative brainwaves and that kind of stuff goes away completely when eyes are open, or almost completely. So I feel like that I trained myself to kind of like live in a different zone, in a different place, and then also to walk deeper in and out of those states of awareness and reality in my work with my clients. So it was a lot of hours of practice. And then, yes, and I have a really, I love working with medicine. I deeply respect it. I kind of talk about like with anything that opens our consciousness, I'll just use like the idea of a coffee mug. You have, if you're sitting inside of that, you have a certain context for what reality is. And let's call that your awareness or your consciousness, and everything that you think kind of exists is inside of that space. And the way I see it is like psychedelics help us to pop our head over that edge, and then we kind of slide back down maybe in the next moment, but we have more information to work with. And eventually we end up in a much larger sized coffee or tea mug, because we can sustain that state that we just had glimpses of. And also we have dropped away the stuff, the healing stuff that needed to happen, the old traumas or stories or whatever. So it's an ever widening aperture of reality, both with psychedelics or any kind of consciousness exploration.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And I love that analogy of just getting like a glimpse over the edge of the cup, and then slipping back, but like having these moments that pop us into these higher states of consciousness. When you are either personally or supporting other people in experiencing expanded forms of consciousness outside of psychedelics, can you explain what that process looks like and how someone, even without the use of psychedelics, can experience these superconscious states?
Yeah, this is a fun question. I don't even know if we've talked about this at all in the past, but when people come to sit with me in person, there's a large proportion of them, if I drop us or me into a certain state, basically have a psychedelic experience. So, and this has been verified by EEG brain study. So my brain hooked up to an EEG, their brain hooked up to an EEG to study the electrical signatures that are happening in the brain. So many data points all happening concurrently. And so it's not in every moment, but when I decide to drop in, when it's time to drop in deeper, I'll ask the client's permission, get really clear on what we want to do. And then essentially, I'm able to just change their brainwave state by standard deviations. And their experience of that can vary. But one of the most common things that I hear is a state of deep surrender and calm, maybe a feeling of increased vulnerability, but a feeling of simultaneous safety. And then I would say probably, I'm just doing this back of hand, I don't have a good number on this, but I would say 8 out of 10 people experience major visual changes, similar to they would on a psychedelic, journey. So I have to prepare people for that part of it and let them know so that they're not startled for that part of the experience. So that's one way. And then another way is, actually behind me, there are these zero gravity recliners that we use, and we hook wires, neurofeedback, electrical sensing wires to their brain and basically sense the information that's going on in their brain and feed it back to them, which is what neurofeedback is. It's not an external signal. It's just your own brain being fed back to you. And with that, we can help people drop into altered states of consciousness. Sometimes people come back from a theta training session and it's like they've had a full on, it can be like a 2-hour movie that happened in less than 2 hours, of course, or like a massive adventure of a dream, but with full lucidity and often with a huge amount of recall so that they really can interpret what happened and understand it. Everything from then I was swinging off of a cord that hung off of the moon, and then I landed into the ocean, and then I swam to the bottom realizing I was a mermaid, and at the bottom I found an egg, and then the egg was a dragon's. And it's like, and all of this happens with just their brain, right? That I'm talking about with no exogenous substance. Like that is their brain learning how to have massive creativity and visioning capacity, all by itself.
Yeah, and what are you exploring is the edges of science that are helping to explain these expanded consciousness states, or like what are the things that are most fascinating to you about that world of like science's effort to kind of like make sense of what people are experiencing?
Yeah, there's one of the most important things that I think is that there is no simple answer. There is no one path to get there. So if you can hear the analogy to talking about the spiritual path, as I talk about a neurological path, right? So we're each extraordinarily unique beings. And that's true maybe in the way that we look, in our soul's essence, but also in our neurology. So there's not like a cookie cutter step-by-step cookbook kind of process to get there. And what even is there? And the there that maybe somebody is aiming for, like some people, maybe we all would love to have a sense of peace, more joy, those kind of things. Those are somewhat obvious. Maybe someone else though would like to be able to sharpen their clairvoyance or their ability to really hear and work with music and sound, or whatever their interests are. Those are really deep for folks, and their aptitudes also run deep. Just like we might be more skilled at a certain sport or a certain art form, like in the physical world. So really realizing that we are all so unique, and the path to getting where we're going is unique, and also what it is that we're here to express is unique. And within that, how do we find the commonalities, right? Like everybody can benefit from some of the basic training that we offer. But how do we really measure and look at and understand some of these really altered states of reality? How do we know when we are looking at someone's brain signature, if they are a really gifted healer and can do distance healing versus if they're a gifted channel? And they may not even know that, which I think is also fascinating. Right? They can have, basically they can have a Ferrari in the garage and not know that they have a car. And not only do they have a vehicle, but they have one of the most incredible vehicles. But because their thought construct doesn't allow it to be so, they believe themselves to be normal, or they don't know if they believe in these kind of things. It's like, okay, well, you have a Ferrari in the car, in the garage. Like, so it's just then becomes, widening that aperture of understanding so that people can recognize themselves and deepen into the experience of something that's quite incredible. It could be like a quite mystical experience, quite gifted in ways that are not seen to them in prior to that. So I think that for me is being able to name and understand the overall trajectory. And of course, there's a lot more detail that I can get into, especially my colleague could speak to, since he's the deeper into neurosciences of the two of us by a tremendous amount. But really understanding that we don't understand who we are. And that there can be, like, we can look at the data and then tell somebody certain things, and a lot of it they'll recognize. But often people miss where they're gifted.
So you're able to use science and these different tools to be able to actually become aware of people's spiritual gifts, the things that they are actually uniquely gifted at. Tell me more about that process, what that looks like.
Yeah. Well, it's done through an EEG. So it's the same thing that, the most brilliant neuroscientists of the world, that's the same study that they use in universities and everywhere. But the way that my colleague knows to interpret the data is kind of like he understands the normal model, but then he's made many more breakthroughs in understanding. Some of that has come from studying a lot of really unusual people. If you've studied like a Zen master monk that's been meditating for hours and hours every day for 30 years, you're going to see some similarities because they've all kind of cultivated a certain signature in their brain by practicing in that way. And that might look different than studying someone's brain who reports that when they were a child, they were talking to angels and that angels would comfort them at night before they went to sleep. It's a very different signature in the brain. So you can really see this, sometimes it's in the auditory cortex. Sometimes it's more about the type of waves, the structure of certain waves like alpha waves, or how much a field of gamma comes up, gamma waves. So there's actually a tremendous amount to it. I think something else that's interesting to see is that it can be the gifts, but it can also be the challenges. And most of neuroscience is really focused on pathology, but they don't necessarily have the insight. Like my colleague has determined that in many cases, there's a certain Brodmann area, which is an area on the cortex of the brain, the outside of the brain. There's a certain Brodmann area that correlates with mother wounds that are unresolved from childhood. It's like, it's kind of the equivalent in a way of like having somebody read your palm, or like, some other divination method. It's so revealing for folks. It's incredible. And what's amazing about it too, is that if it can be named on the EEG, that it can often, we can train any of those areas. So it's not like there's anything that's particularly bad news. It's just like, oh, cool. We have a project, like this is This is a great area of exploration.
So in your personal life, what have these studies or brain scans revealed to you, and what surprised you the most?
For myself, so 13 or 14 years ago, my colleague actually measured my brain for the first time soon after we met. And technology has come a long way, just like we might think about the way that cell phones were 13 or 14 years ago. But even back then, he's like, whoa, you're like incredibly psychically gifted, like very, very attuned, very able to track very much in your body, those kind of things. And yeah, and I think that for me, it's created a validation for a lot of otherwise bizarre or mystical experiences that I've had. That it's helped me to anchor, because it's easy for any of us, no matter where we're at, to either push away the unseen world or to deny that something incredible just happened. And I feel like that when we have data that shows that, it's really helpful. Like I used to think when I was doing neurofeedback, like just a normal session, not in a retreat format, my colleague would be watching over my shoulder as my EEG is going live, and I'm receiving information about my brain, or my brain is receiving information about itself, really, because I can't even perceive it fast enough to make sense of it. But I'm looking at a screen and I'm hearing some sounds, and I just feel like I'm thinking. And he would be like, what just happened? What did you do? What was that? And I'm like, I'm just thinking about, and he's like, that is not called thinking. What did you just do? And so I didn't realize that in that moment, I was thinking, maybe in that case, like I was sending a blessing to a friend or to a client, like from a deep place inside of me. But I was just perceiving that as like an internal process in a normal sort of way. And then what he was seeing was like a massive change in my EEG that, thinking is like beta waves, and it happens in certain areas and in certain places in the brain. And he's like, yeah, that had nothing to do with thought. And it was, and I think that that phenomenon basically correlates to that. I was part of what I was working with my clients is just having their desires be made manifest, right? Like my ability to send my prayers out for them and have their dreams come true. So when I saw that on data with the data, and when I heard his response, it helped me to anchor it in and quiet my own skeptic and believe in myself more.
I mean, it has to be really validating after all of these years and an entire lifetime of these like experiences that feel different than what other people express that they're experiencing. It's going to be so validating to actually see charts or data that like, validate this experience that you're having, psychically or spiritually, or, I think that's amazing. We just have a few more minutes right now, but I want you to kind of tune into as you look at the future and like this next chapter of humanity. What are some things you see, and what are the things you're most excited for about that next chapter?
One of the things I see is that, I feel more optimism, even though it feels like that we're headed towards and are maybe even really in some turbulent times. And my reason for optimism is that I'm seeing a large number of people waking up to things. I really feel like that whether it's through the path of psychedelics or whatever it is that people are endeavoring in, that there's some shifts in their perception and reality, and that we don't need everybody to be awake to what needs to come next or how to get through some of these hard times, but we need enough people to be aware. And I feel like we're achieving that in a great amount. I'm seeing a lot of people gathering in order to talk about how do we reform community and society? How do we work with governance? How do we work with resources? How do we reform and retool ourselves to potentially reinvent capitalism? Things like that. So I feel like that there are some really incredible souls, incredible people working together. They're getting out of their silos. They're less worried about the I, me, mine, as I call it. They're less worried about building their own empire and more interested in a deep and more sustaining way at collaborating. And I feel like that's really that's the needed bridge. We can do anything we need to together when we remember we're all connected and when we work accordingly.
Yeah. I think you just described what's at the heart of the alliance for us. The alliance is this gathering of people who know that it's time to do business and life differently. People that have been impacted positively by psychedelics or these other forms or tools of accessing higher states of consciousness, and are feeling the call, like I know you have, to create sacred space, to build retreat centers or to steward land, and the people that are called to facilitate and to lead and to guide either communities or individuals through that journey of awakening and remembering and healing. And then also, pulling together people that have resources, either financial resources or technological resources, so that we can really collaborate and serve at a higher level. And so this is something I would love to talk to you more about. But then anyone else that's listening, you really feel this call, that the new earth is calling you to create like a different reality, that it's time to reinvent how we culturally navigate healing and creation and, abundance. And that's really who we're calling forth. Is there any message?
It's beautiful.
Just kind of tuning in, a kind of final question for you. Like, what message do you feel like you most want to share with our audience, but also with humanity right now? Like, what's the message that you feel is on your heart right now?
Yeah. I think it's really around enoughness and lovability. I think that most people are suffering regardless of who they are or what they've accomplished or what they want to do or their story. Most people are suffering from, I'm not good enough, or I'm not lovable, or maybe it's, I don't matter. And I feel like that all of that can be remedied when we drop into that connection state with ourselves as a timeless soul on an endless journey. And then from that space, we connect with the all that is. And I feel like that it's essential that we be in that remembrance, because it's time to get through. It's time to remember who we are and what we've come here to do. Remember our own divinity, so we can work together in ways like you were talking about with the Alliance. I feel like that's the essential healing for the self. But then holographically, which the name of my company is Hold On, because the interconnectedness of all things. So holographically, and when we're healing ourselves and when we're in that connected space, we automatically come into that feeling of connection and coherence with the all that is. We're not going to get there with our minds, right? The healing, the solutions, our minds are tools, but we have to be aligned internally and with each other in a deep state of coherence, and with the earth, maybe even most importantly, so that we can really find the way through with ease and create something that's really sustainable and very beautiful to live as an expression.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. What a beautiful transmission. And thanks so much for sharing the space with us. For anyone that's listening that wants to go deeper into your work or follow you or learn more about, the life-changing stuff that you and your partner are doing, what's the best way for them? What's the next step?
Yeah, thank you. Our website's probably the easiest thing. It'll direct kind of from there. It's Hold On Experience, and holdonexperience.com. And you can see the different services that the different offerings that we have, be it retreats or an online mystery school, to be able to understand this unseen world and work with the field of creation more. Whether it's something to get your neurology straight, we kind of have everything in that blend of rich spirituality meets the nerdiest of neurosciences. And and then also there, if people want me to come and help them with what their projects are, that's something else that I'm very interested in. Being, if anybody's feeling called to or resonates, to have me come and facilitate or speak to their audiences and help to produce events. It's something I really enjoy as well.
That's amazing. I love it. So Thank you so much for being here. And thank you everyone for joining us for this episode of Psychedelics, Sex and the Superconscious, as we continue to go on this journey of exploring tools for us to access our higher mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald.
Thank you, legendary explorers, for joining us on this cosmic journey today.
Your curiosity fuels our exploration of psychedelics, sex, and the superconscious.
If you're hungry for more, dive into our website and connect with us on social media. All the links are in the show notes.
And stay tuned for our next mind-expanding episode. We can't wait to talk to you again in our next adventure.
Until then, remember, this is your life. So,
make it legendary.